In this week's episode, we'll be talking about Shape of Water,
The Post,
Cloverfield Paradox,
Annihilation, and Cobra Kai previews.
Miss Sloane,
Good time.
our favorite serial killer movies,
And the movie Seven.
Welcome to episode 10 of the Harsch Review, a film and TV podcast. My name is Sean, and with me is my brother Ryan.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
What's happening, Ryan? How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. It's been a busy week. Lots of movies, lots of shows. We got a lot to cover. Let's get to it.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So, rumor has it you've got some previews there.
Yeah, I got a couple. Well, one of them's been out for a little bit, and the other one I just saw, I think last night, and it kind of excited me when I saw it. It's going to be on YouTube's Red. I don't really know about this until I saw it. The Red station,
YouTube Red.
Yeah,
YouTube Red. It's kind of like their version of Netflix or Hulu. They're starting to kind of program original content, but most of their stuff sucks.
Oh, okay. Well, this one may or may not suck. It's Cobra Kai, and it pretty much. Do you know anything? Is that?
Oh yeah.
What does that mean when I say Cobra Kai?
Fear does not exist in this dojo, does it?
We are not taught to be merciful here. Mercy is for the weak.
Do you have a problem, Mr. Lawrence?
Yes. So
Class,
this is
visitors.
basically picking up where it's in the future, obviously, from the Karate Kid, and it's grown up Johnny and grown up Daniel LaRusso. And the previews,
LaRusso.
the preview's under a minute, but we hear the voiceover, and then we see an older Johnny and an older Ralph Macchio. Pretty much looks the same as he did in My Cousin Vinny, actually. He doesn't look that much older.
That dude doesn't age.
Yeah, he looks pretty good. So it's going to be a series. It's not going to be a movie. So I'm not sure what to think. I think it's more about, it's supposed to be about their kids, and I guess they're fighting again. So
Sure.
we'll see. I don't know.
We don't know. There was a little nod to Miyagi in there, so his absence will definitely be there. I'm sure Daniel's probably going to take that role a little bit. They still have beef after all these years over some dumb, karate issue when you're in high school. It's kind of ridiculous, but
Yeah,
I
get
love the
over it.
original Karate Kid.
That's a good
I'm
one.
curious
we have
to
to talk
see.
about that.
Yeah, I know it's in total 80s movie. The soundtrack is awesome, but yeah, it holds up from a nostalgia point of view. I'm excited about it. We'll see.
Yeah. The other one I saw was, or just kind of rewatched, a longer one, was Annihilation. And
Oh yes,
this is the second directorial feature from Alex Garland, I think his name is.
yes it is.
Yeah,
Mr.
he did.
Garland.
Yeah, he did Ex Machina, which is a great movie. That's pretty much now a sci-fi classic.
Yeah, it was
So
awesome.
this preview, it stars Natalie Portman, Jennifer Jason Leigh. The preview is really kind of ambiguous. You don't know what's going on, but it looks awesome. So I'm excited to see it. I think it comes out the end of next month.
Yeah, I actually think it's in maybe a week from now. To be honest,
okay.
I think it's coming out next Friday. There's been some controversy around it, mainly because of the way that the studio was releasing it, not thinking it was going to make much money. They were limiting how many screens it was going to be in, and then there's been talk of it being whitewashed. Natalie Portman even went on record saying that yes, but I mean, what are you going to do about it? There should be more efforts going in.
Yeah.
And that's because the characters in the book that it was based off of are of different races, but it doesn't really say which races. If I remember reading it correctly. Either way, I think it looks awesome. I love the work that he's doing.
Yeah.
You did mention Garland. He also kind of had a news story this week that he wants to direct Swamp Thing. So
Nice.
Who knows?
Swamp Thing.
Yeah, that's a shift.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, his books are great. I mean, the people that are not familiar with his work, he wrote a book called The Beach. Buddy Johan gave that to me many moons ago before the movie was even in discussion. And
you
Danny
gave me
Boyle
that
did
book
that
after
one.
you read it. Yeah.
Yeah, the book is awesome.
I love it.
The movie's a bit too Hollywood for me.
Yeah.
But it still kind of captures some of the coolness about it. And he went on to do various other books. He did like the Tesseract, and he did the screenplay. I think his first official one, or what he wrote was for 28 Days Later. And so finally he made his breakthrough with Ex Machina, and now this is his sophomore effort. So we'll see.
I'm excited.
Yeah, man, good call outs. So other than some previews, any movies you've seen this week?
Well, I saw two. I saw The Shape of Water and I saw The Post.
Oh, you've been busy.
Yeah. So which one should we start with?
I haven't seen The Post. I've been wanting to. I'm curious to see what you thought.
Well, I actually saw it the other night and I thought it was really good. It's based on some historical stuff. So it seems like Spielberg's making either like sci-fi movies or historical based films. So this definitely falls in the latter category. It's about Daniel Ellsberg, who in the late 60s, early 70s, photocopied a bunch of top secret documents from the Pentagon and eventually tried to release them to the newspapers. So it kind of follows that vein. And so I thought it was really good. Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep are the hyped cast for this one. But there's a lot of really good supporting actors that are coming in this movie. Bob Odenkirk and David Cross are back together again. They're kind of playing prominent roles in this. Michael Stuhlbarg's in it. Just a really good movie, really good pace. I liked it. I liked it a lot. Was it the right length? Wasn't too short, too long? Yeah, it went by really quick. Like I think it's a little over 2 hours, and it just like there's a couple scenes in there that just kind of really zip by, and the pacing was great. I wasn't let down at all. I thought it was a fascinating story. I knew a little bit about it going in, but then I got a little more insight into all the events. It was kind of like the first WikiLeaks guy. So if you want to think about that before WikiLeaks, but it was done in a whole different way. A lot of really sensitive issues are kind of still relevant about, how much power does the president have to make changes, and is the journalism field, is that going to be holding people accountable? Does that serve the people or does that serve the government? So it raised a lot of really good kind of moral issues that are still relevant, I think, and should still be talked about. I was reading a story about it where when they were making it and what was written, coincidentally just kind of lines up with a lot of current events and stuff with our current administration, and there was pressure for them to do some rewrites to maybe address some of the more current events. And that didn't happen. They stayed the course, and I guess it still kind of applies to things that are happening today. Yeah, people will still kind of take what they want from it, and you can watch it a couple ways. You can just watch it as a historical drama, or you can watch it and say, okay, what are they saying about current events? What are they saying about the role of the press? What are they saying about the president? Because the president in this movie is Nixon. I don't know if you know anything about Nixon, but he was quite the character. How soon did this movie take place before Watergate? Well, it's 1971, and I think Watergate took place a couple years later. But at this time, Nixon was still making tapes. So I didn't really have time to research this movie, but you're really seeing Nixon in this movie just through a window the whole time. And you're hearing kind of like the tapes and the conversations he had with his chiefs of staff. He was notorious for recording everything almost to a level of paranoia. So it's possible that the dialogue in the film is from those tapes, because a lot of them have been released to the public record. But either way, it was done pretty well to where they didn't try to recreate Nixon and have any kind of close-up shots. It was just kind of done from afar, which I kind of like that part. Yeah, his presence is there, but he's not the main focal point. Sure. Where do you think it stands? Does the Oscar buzz warranted? The Oscar buzz for this film? Yeah. Do you feel like it was warranted? I think so. I wasn't like overwhelmed or anything, but I still think Hanks did a great job and Meryl Streep did a great job, but they're both great in pretty much everything they do anyway. So, I don't think it'll sweep anything up, but I was impressed. Well, we'll see. Yes, we will. I definitely want to check it out. Glad to hear it wasn't a bomb. Yeah, it was good.
So I saw Shape of Water. I know you finally got around to seeing it as well.
Yes.
My initial impressions was that it was a very, simple movie. So, not surprised, but it's kind of a relief just having a very simple story, given the complexity of so many films that are coming out today.
Yeah.
It was shot beautifully. The music was really nice. It was a little quirky, a little bit weird, which is kind of what you're expecting. But I was a little underwhelmed.
Yeah.
Maybe it's because I've been hearing so much about it prior to seeing it.
Right.
And I think the marketing didn't quite help it as much. It kind of gave away a little bit too much.
Sure.
But I thought Michael Shannon was awesome in it. The acting was great. There's really nothing I can complain about it. Just for me, it wasn't. It was a little bit too predictable, and I guess the pace on it just kind of could have moved differently with the story, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, first hour was kind of slow. We had a lot of character development, some interesting things going on. It did kind of pick up in the second half of it, but yeah, I can relate to what you're saying.
I definitely think he's going to be a strong contender for directing, because that was what I was impressed with the most. Just the camera movement, the editing, the way that scenes were shot and set up really kind of captured a really cool atmosphere. The sets that they had, timepieces and things for was it the 60s, Baltimore. Had a really cool vibe.
I mean, I knew it was the 60s, but it felt like it was a little timeless,
Yeah.
Just with a lot of the kind of little nuances of the film, it felt like it could have been the 50s even, or just kind of right at that point where the 60s was coming out of the 50s and changed.
So I enjoyed it. I was interested throughout the whole movie. It honestly, and I wrote a basic spoiler-free review for it on our website, theharschreview.com. And I think you take out some of the quirky, more rated R type elements, and it felt like it could have been a Pixar story.
Yeah.
Very, very, very simple love story. But Del Toro was talking about a lot of connections, I guess, between acceptance and things that are in our modern society that really inspired him to do it, and accepting people that are different than us, and just recognizing that. So I think it was a really nice story to tell. I'm glad it's getting the right kind of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Just for me personally,
he's a great director. I mean, he's got a real kind of really great imagination and sense of creativity when it comes to what he makes.
Yeah, I appreciate his point of view, and I appreciate his character and uniqueness that goes into it, to where you really don't feel like he's making a movie for box office numbers. He's making movies that he loves, and that shows.
Yeah,
you don't find that with many directors. So if you're looking for a good, simple love story that's got a weird sci-fi quirkiness to it, it's definitely unique. It's not action. It's a slow burn that kind of really focuses on the performance and the characters as they're developing, and you're kind of along the way with all of them. And there's some really great moments. I think my favorite lines was Michael Shannon, who anything he's in, he's awesome in my opinion.
He's just creepy.
I think he's so good, and he has a line in there where he this is a semi spoiler, but he loses a couple fingers, and he's trying to take like an optimistic approach, and he says, "Hey, I still got my pointer, my trigger, and my pussy finger," and so. I don't know. I thought it was just kind of funny.
Something you should tack on your fridge there.
Yeah. It's a nice phrase if you only have 3 fingers left.
Sure.
So
he has a point.
Yeah. Shape of Water. Go check it out. And moving on to the outer space, I did get around to seeing Cloverfield Paradox. I know you mentioned it an episode or two ago.
Yes.
I just thought I'd share my 2 cents on it, and we could kind of talk a little bit about it, because now that I've seen it, I thought it sucked.
Okay.
And I'm really critical. Yeah, I'm really critical with space movies, because it's really hard to tell a new story in space, and everything that kind of happened on it was just another been there, done that. I really didn't feel like it had anything unique to tell or contribute. It was in regards to like a space story.
Really derivative,
Oh yeah, and after doing some research, and this was something that was completed, I think a couple years ago, it was going to be called the God Particle, and it wasn't even part of the Cloverfield universe. And then they went back and did reshoots and things to tie it into it. The acting was good.
Yeah.
I thought that the casting was good. It looked fine. Like from a production point of view, everything was there. Just the substance is not there.
Yeah.
And I would argue anybody that says it's a great space movie.
It's kind of like they wrote the premise and they just kind of gave up on it halfway through.
Yeah, it seems like you had the money for it and you kind of went through the motions, and the actors did their best to kind of play it out. But the writing and just the overall story, there was just nothing, no surprises. You didn't really care who lived, who died.
Yeah.
I mean, look, people go to space. They have some mission to save all of mankind. Seen that before. We've seen it with Interstellar. We've seen it with Sunshine. You see it in different movies like Event Horizon even have their style. And then something wrong happens.
Alien kind of started all that.
Something, right? Yeah, something bad happen, and then one by one the crew gets picked off. That's how many times have we seen that type of movie?
Yes, we have.
So that's where I just kind of went like, I know how this is going. And then there's elements of it that just didn't make sense. It didn't really, the unique thing that was happening in this movie compared to other ones may have been where its identity was to be found with the scenario. So I'll give it credit for that. But again, like they didn't really build that up that much. They didn't really explain a whole lot of things. So there's a lot of these weird space moments that didn't really have any foundation laid. So when it happened, you're just more confused than anything. You didn't really feel like there's a narrative developing here. It was just kind of going from one scenario to the next.
Yeah, you just didn't really know what was going on half the time.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like there's a missed opportunity. It makes sense that it was a rush to Netflix. It definitely doesn't feel like it was intended to be an A+ movie. So overall, I was just a little bored, a little disappointed, and I was like, it's kind of what I expected. If you like space movies, definitely watch it. It's
entertaining
suck.
to a point.
Yeah, it's not terribly made or anything. I just didn't enjoy it. I didn't think it was original.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Couple other movies I'll just hammer before we move on. So I also got around to your other recommendation of watching Good Time. Robert Pattinson. Definitely no Good Time. That movie again. It was a 99-cent rental.
Ironically named.
Yeah, nothing good happens in this movie. It is beyond fucked up. It is super sad, and it just kind of ends.
His character is just despicable.
Yeah, I was engaged with the story, and I was engaged with the character development. But in the end, I just kind of asked myself, like, why? What did this movie want to accomplish? What do they want to tell? And I didn't really get that. I mean, what do you think they were trying to? What story did they want to tell?
Just kind of this. I mean, I don't know. It's like you had the disabled brother, so I think he was really like the focal point of the movie, and it was just trying to get him in a place where he could be comfortable and happy. And he had all these kind of forces, namely his brother, pulling him away from that. So I think it kind of focused on him, but it's got a really kind of negative worldview or point of view, if you want to say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just kind of not really cohesive storyline.
No, and for those who haven't seen it, without giving any spoilers away, essentially you have a special needs brother, and his older brother, whoever, gets him in trouble and just kind of using him, and just kind of messes up his life in some respects. He sent him down the wrong path.
Right.
A bunch of bad shit happens, and he's trying to correct that the whole time. But in doing so, he's still very selfish in his nature. So he wants to still get a piece for himself while trying to take care of his brother a little bit. And it just goes from one bad scenario to another, and then just ends on a bad scenario. And that's it. And so I don't know. It was interesting. Yeah, it was interesting. It's kind of a slice of life movie. There really isn't a whole lot there. It's just a little simple story over the course of a couple hours. It's definitely, I mean, it's like $8 to buy it on iTunes. It's 99-cent rental this last week. It's unique. It's worth checking out. But again, it's definitely a pretty jacked up movie.
Yeah, not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, so after I watched that, I went on to Amazon Prime, which is kind of like the the dingy alley of the streaming services because most of their content is just not that great. But I watched
the red
Miss
light
Sloane.
district.
Yeah, I watched Miss Sloane,
Uh,
and it's Jessica Chastain was the lead in it, and I think you should watch that movie. I think
Okay.
it was definitely really well done. It's one of those political thrillers that kind of centers around she's like this primo lobbyist that knows how to win votes, obviously within Congress, and how she influences Congress. So she's competing with another lobbyist firm to try to win gun votes, and ironically, given the tragedy that happened in I believe Florida a couple days ago, the movie centers around gun control, and it centers around passing laws that protect guns, and it was made I think a year and a half, 2 years ago.
okay.
So it really
Very
felt like a
timely
contemporary. Oh yeah, and I didn't know that going into it. I was like, well, what do you know?
Yeah.
Super fast, super heavy dialogue. There's a lot going on, so you have to kind of stay with it, so to speak. And if you snooze on any scenes, you're gonna definitely kind of feel a little bit out of the loop. The cast was great, and so Michael Stolberg, I think that's how you pronounce his name.
That guy's
Mark
in
Strong,
everything.
Sam Watterson, John Lithgow. It was a great cast.
Wow.
Very very well executed. Had some really cool twists to it. A lot of redeeming qualities, but I don't know how it's one of those ones that's kind of like House of Cards, where you watch it and you go, is that really what goes on in up at the Capitol? It makes you think that way, where it's probably there's some truth to how certain things are done, but obviously it was a little bit Hollywood.
You haven't really heard too much about this movie. I've never really heard about it.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, I liked anything that she's done. I really liked her in Zero Dark 30.
Yeah.
And she did great in this. She really carries the movie, and I think it's one of her key leading roles after Zero Dark 30. It's a good political thriller, but again, this isn't one where you can casually be on your cell phone and watch. The dialogue is quick, it's fast, and it's got a lot of substance. So there's some huge twists and unexpected things that happen. You can easily miss it. So make sure you got a lot of caffeine going through you. It kind of reminded me of a fast-paced Michael Clayton.
Nice. Okay.
So yeah, check it out.
I'll have to watch that.
All right. Well, I think that closes up what's new with us for this week. And we're going to be moving into the territory talking about the old dark movie 7.
Yes.
Ryan wanted to do a little bit of chat about some serial killer movies.
That would be our theme this week. So I wanted to kind of just go back and forth on some serial killer movies we've seen, either in the past or recently. So I'll start with 2. And I was just kind of scrolling through HBO now. And the first one I started watching was The Bone Collector.
Oh.
Denzel Washington, Angelina Jolie.
Yeah, that's a 90s one, right?
Yeah. And there was a scene in there where the CGI was so terrible I had to turn it off. I couldn't do it.
You called it?
I don't know. I don't know. My eye is just different now, having seen all these great movies with special effects, that there was just some terrible CGI. I couldn't do it, so I had to turn it off 10 minutes in. I don't know
what was going on.
It was like a background, and it looked completely fake. And then he was in a hole, and something was falling on him, and that looked really terrible. So I couldn't do it.
Yeah, that's where they're like setting up the whole premise of the movie, and it just looks like shit. So you're like, I respect the audio snob.
Yes.
Or the audio video snobs there. So
video, and then the second one I started was Along Came a Spider. Morgan Freeman, Monica Potter, and again, CG. There was a car chase, and the car went off a cliff, and it looked so bad. It looked like someone falls out of the car, and it looks like a Barbie doll falling out of a toy car.
Sure.
I again had to turn it off.
That's a shame too, because it's not a bad story.
Sure.
I mean, I've seen both of them. It's been a long time, and they're not bad stories. But that's the problem with dating your movie is if it wasn't really kick ass at the time, it's not going to age well. And there's this era of CGI movies that kind of started right around the early 80s.
Yeah.
And I think all the way up through the mid to late 90s, to where people just started rushing things and started cutting corners because CGI was kind of new.
Yeah.
And it really ruined a lot of movies.
They're still developing it. I mean, even like I've recently seen movies like Blade and The Matrix, and there's even some stuff in there that doesn't look that great. And at the time, you're like, yeah, this is amazing. And then looking back on it now, it's like, that kind of looks shitty.
Sure. And that's where The Matrix had these visual gimmicks, so it's showing you something you've never seen before. And it definitely inspired a whole new generation of filmmaking. But at the same time, yeah, I agree. You go back to the source material and you go, well, I don't remember it looking that bad.
Yeah, it's something you haven't seen before and something you don't want to see again.
Yeah, that's the difference between, I think, a book and a movie.
Yes.
Is movies got to be very good, in my opinion, to survive all those different generations of art. Whereas a book, it doesn't matter when it was written, instantly is going to be more timeless.
Yeah, because a lot of a book, it really exists in the reader's mind. Whereas with the movie, you're just kind of giving it straight up, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. All right, so 0 for 2, didn't make it through those. Did you make it through any?
Yeah, I got 3 more, but I want to hear one from you first.
All right. This would be Manhunt Unabomber. Okay. It's on Netflix.
Saw that.
If you on Netflix now. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. I think any Unabomber story is pretty kick-ass, and it's just a fascinating person with Kaczynski. You know how much of how crazy he went. I don't know if it is the classic serial killer movie. I think much like a lot of these other ones that we're talking, especially like in the vein of Seven, but if he was more successful than he definitely fits that pattern.
Yeah.
I liked seeing how they caught the Unabomber. So you get this thing between Sam Worthington and then Paul Bettany, who was a curious choice for Ted Kaczynski. I thought he did well.
He was good.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't sold at first.
Not who I think would be.
Right, yeah. And I always just remember him as Silas, the albino from Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
I can't remember the character's name. Something like that.
Silas.
But Silas, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, that works.
I'm like, wow. But it's interesting to see. I love all those kind of detective movies where there's how they capture them and the pressures of what they're going for, and how long this guy evaded law, and what they actually had to pin him on in order to hunt it down is really fascinating. So
yeah,
it's a great movie. I liked
how it unraveled. Mm-hmm.
I just stumbled across it and was actually rather impressed. It did a little bit of research afterwards, seeing where they moved the Unabomber's cabin and some of the things that they have on display. What that guy went through in the living conditions and stuff, it's really interesting. So check it out, Manhunt on Netflix.
Very cool. Okay, so I saw one similar in title. It's called Manhunter. You heard of this one?
Manhunter.
And so it's a late 80s movie directed by Michael Mann, and it's pretty much the original version of Red Dragon. Okay, so so Hannibal Lecter. So Hannibal Lecter is played by Brian Cox, who was the antagonist in X-Men 2. He's done a bunch of other stuff, but he played a pretty good Hannibal Lecter, I think. He's not in the movie for a whole lot, but he does kind of plays it differently and well. You're kind of stuck thinking about Anthony Hopkins, and you have to kind of break that and imagine someone else doing the role. But I thought he did
sure
good.
You got to get over it.
Yeah, just get over it. William Peterson's in it, who you may know from CSI. And then like a bunch of random people are in it. I saw at one point Chris Elliott was in it. Just like, Dennis Farina from Snatch. It's pretty good. It's definitely a movie of its time, though. I mean, this with like the 80s kind of, guitar and synthesizers and stuff. But I was entertained. It's on Amazon Prime.
So this came out before Silence of the Lambs, right?
Yeah. I think it came out a couple years before.
So do you think that people that saw it in its current time and then they went in and saw Silence, do you think they had a hard time with Anthony Hopkins' Hannibal Lecter?
It's possible, but it seemed like Manhunter wasn't like a huge box office draw. At times, it kind of seemed like a made-for-TV movie, and I didn't really do a lot of research on this, so it may well could have been. But I think when they got Hannibal Lecter and being played by Anthony Hopkins, they got something totally new and different. They might have just forgotten about this movie, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I mean, he was just so good in that.
Huh. Yeah, I'll need to look into that.
Yeah.
Not promising anything. There's a lot of manhunting movies going on.
Yeah, this is one of them.
Yeah, another manhunting movie that I enjoyed was Zodiac.
Oh yeah.
And I think I love this movie. And it's good. For another Fincher flick, Jake Gyllenhaal, Mark Ruffalo, Anthony Edwards, Robert Downey Jr., Brian Cox, John Carroll Lynch. There's a great cast that is in this. I like it because it's a long movie. It's not a short one. It's 2.5 hours long. Looking after these, the Zodiac killer and everything that went kind of behind that. Robert Downey is awesome in this.
Yeah, he is.
And this was I think came out right before or near the time of Iron Man. So his stock started, his presence started coming back around again. It's a great movie, and it's definitely creeps me out that they still haven't ever found out who that dude is.
Yeah, and I mean, I've read the book, and they have a lot of speculation, but it's like they're never really gonna know.
No, and there's even that scene in the movie where he thinks he knows who it is and goes to the shop where he's working, and like even winds up in the guy's house, and it's just all kind of creepy, and he doesn't really get confirmation, but he kind of goes like, I think that's the dude.
Yeah.
And that was just a creepy scene, or just a series of events. Very well done. And thankfully they released that on Netflix just recently too. Although I own that one.
Nice.
I really like it. So if you haven't seen Zodiac, definitely do yourself a favor, check it out.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one. All right, I got 2 more for you.
All right, hit me.
And then we'll jump into our feature. So I saw one called Citizen X. It's a made for HBO movie, came out in the 90s, and it stars Stephen Ray, Donald Sutherland, and Dale from The Walking Dead.
Dale,
Dale with the hat.
Dale, yeah, should.
Yeah.
Why am I drawn? Is it the old guy?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Drove the RV.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So Dale's in this, and it's pretty much the same story that came out a couple years ago in Child 44. It starred Tom Hardy and Gary Oldman. It's about the biggest serial killer in Russia. He killed 53 people over, I think, like a 10 to 15 year period.
Jesus, Russians.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And I mean, part of the reason why you get to see it in Citizen X, which is a really good movie, actually, just kind of the bureaucracy, almost like the government was in denial that there was a serial killer. So they were just kind of stonewalling the investigation. But it's very fascinating. I enjoyed it. It's kind of like the early days of HBO making movies. But this is definitely one of the good ones.
Oh, so it's on HBO now. And when was it out again? The 90s?
Yeah, I think late 90s.
Huh. Yeah, I definitely want to look into that.
Yeah, check it out. I mean, it's a good story. I didn't really know anything about it, but this guy was pretty savage. So definitely worth seeing.
What was his name? Do you know?
Yep. And then I got one more.
All right.
And this one I recently watched. It's called The Snowman, or as I now call it,
poor thing.
The shit man.
I knew better than to watch that one.
Yeah, well, I read the book some time ago, and the book's really good. Definitely a page turner. This is something I was honestly reading on the treadmill. I wanted something mindless to kind of read through, and it definitely grabbed me. But the movie was terrible. I'm sorry.
So what's I just remember hearing Michael Fassbender was in this really bad movie and it just wasn't worth your time. So I kind of stayed away. But what's the premise of Snowman?
Basically, just like a quick rundown. It takes place in Norway. And by the way, no one really in this movie really had kind of a Norwegian accent. There were a lot more like British accents. So I don't know what's going on in Norway, but I think the shooting was in Oslo, so I think it was authentic in that respect, but the accents were just definitely whatever actor was in it, they just brought their own accent. It's more or less just about a killer and this detective played by Michael Fassbender named Harry Hole, Don't laugh. And
Okay.
yeah, yeah, no, it's all right. One thing that really
you're
bothered me about this
setting me
movie,
up there.
yeah, well, one thing that really bothered me about this movie was that no one made fun of his last name like the whole movie. And I'm sorry, but that's just a name that's kind of ripe for roasting. So
Yeah, who's this?
You could have broken the tension up by making some little jabs with his last name, but no one did.
Is there a Harry?
Yeah.
Harry Hole?
Hole.
I'm looking for a Harry Hole, people.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically he's just on the trail of a serial killer, but, and that's all I really want to say about it. But one thing that really disturbed me about this movie was the inclusion of one Val Kilmer.
Oh, chubby Val?
No, I mean, he looks horrible. And I know he's gone through some cancer recently, but honestly, when I saw him on screen, I didn't even recognize him. It was very sad. And, it's kind of weird because I looked up an article on this, and apparently he's not talking in the movie. It's like a voiceover. So his lips are moving, but you could tell someone obviously is talking. And then half the time there's a scene where he's sitting down talking to somebody and it's over the shoulder and then it's someone else talking.
Why would they do that?
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I let the guy rest and, recover. I don't know why he had to be in this movie. So that was kind of creepy, but
probably needs to pay the bills.
Apparently, but, I wasted $1.50 on this movie. So whatever. I mean, that's gone now.
Yeah, that could have been a load of laundry.
It could have been, but
so you don't recommend it to anybody?
No, I'm sorry, but even like great actors like J.K. Simmons and Michael Fassbender, they couldn't save this movie. So definitely disappointing.
Yeah, Fassbender's he's kind of been on a downward spiral with some movies. I mean, I enjoyed him in Assassin's Creed.
Yeah,
for whatever for that movie is. It's entertaining. I love the games, but it wasn't the greatest movie. And he's got this one that's coming out. I mean, outside of seeing him in, Inglourious Bastards or as Magneto, he hasn't really, I can't really think of something where he's really carried that role very well. So,
well, he did a movie called Hunger.
Yep.
Which he was pretty good in that. I mean, it's very harrowing, kind of hard to watch film, and he did a great job in that. But that's pretty much like an unknown movie. I mean, the general public isn't going to know about that.
Yeah, I have it on my list to see because I've heard there's some great scenes in that one, but
it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I need to get to it.
Yeah, but I agree. He needs to be a little more consistent.
Well,
okay. Well, I think that's it for the serial killer movies. Should we jump right into our feature presentation?
Yeah, Ryan, what are we doing?
All right, we're doing 7.
Let's do it.
The 7 deadly sins. 1. Pride. Pride is an unrestrained and improper appreciation of our own worth. 2. Greed. Greed is the immoderate desire for earthly goods, as well as situations such as power. 3. Gluttony, the sin of overindulgence and overconsumption of food and drink. 4. Lust, the sin of lust refers to impure desire of a sexual nature. 5. Sloth. Sloth is the sin of laziness. 6. Envy. The sin of envy or jealousy is more than merely one person wanting what someone else has. It means unjustified sorrow and distress about the good fortune of someone else. 7. Wrath. Wrath is anger.
So, what attracted me to this movie? This movie, it really sticks with you. Hard to believe when I looked up the year. It was released in 95. So this movie is about 22, 23 years old. And more or less, it's not really part of a established genre. Okay. So on one point, it is a serial killer. It is also a psychological thriller. It is also like a cop movie, almost like a buddy movie. But it defies the genre, and it also defies the expectations. So, before I get too into this movie, what are your initial impressions, Sean, of Seven?
I remember it's probably one of the first, surprise type movies that had a couple key moments and scenes in it that really stuck with you, that you just did not see. You really couldn't predict. You couldn't see where the movie's going. So I enjoyed a story that you kind of felt it through the point of view of the detectives. And I just remember, even after seeing the movie, nowadays everybody's quoting it, and it's kind of been part of culture. But I just remember what it was like at the time. Yeah. And when it was fresh, it definitely had a resonance or a sting with you. And so I can't think of too many serial killer movies that, when I saw this, I was, I don't know, maybe 20 years old almost. And it was definitely pretty shocking. Yeah. Visually, just took it to a whole nother level. It was really dark. Mm-hmm. And I just remember going dude, that movie's fucked up, but it was awesome. It was awesome. Yeah. So you don't say that about many movies. That's just what I remember when I initially saw it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I kind of want to approach this review in a couple different ways. I wanted to talk a little bit about, pre-production with the casting and the directing. And then I wanted to go through the plot a little bit. This review will have spoilers, but you know what? This movie is 23 years old. So
if you haven't that long already, huh?
Yeah. I mean, if you haven't seen it yet, I think the spoiler rule is well past due on this one. So, I might be a little bit all over the place, but feel free to jump in wherever you want. So the movie is Seven, directed by David Fincher, written by Andrew Kevin Walker, and it stars, the main stars, we have 4 Oscar winners. Can you name them, Sean?
Yeah, we got Brad Pitt. Uh-huh. I don't know. You've got Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and the late Kevin Spacey.
The late Kevin Spacey. Very good.
Yeah.
So budget was $33 million, and the box office is $327.3 million. And where do you think this movie takes place at, Sean?
New York.
Okay, yeah, very good. So it does take place in New York, but actually a lot of the filming took place, or actually all of the filming took place in Los Angeles, which I didn't know before researching this movie. So it all took place in LA. The final kind of, cathartic scene in the film takes place in a little town called Lancaster, which is right outside of Los Angeles. So, but I mean, you really feel like it is New York, but kind of in a throwback to one of our episodes earlier when we talked about The Wire, where it could be really any city, and the city in this film really takes on kind of a life of its own and becomes, like we talked about, a separate character. Mm-hmm. That kind of drives.
They did a great job with setting that tone and kind of capturing that, because the New York, or the version that the way that it's portrayed is you really only see the dingy type of city. You don't really get any of the glitz or glamour of large cities. You really feel like you're in the armpit of the city.
Absolutely.
They kind of stay in that pocket the whole time.
Right. So I have a couple little notes here on the casting of it, and some of these might surprise you. So we have 2 characters. We have Somerset, who went to Morgan Freeman, and we have Mills, who went to Brad Pitt. So we have a couple actors that were considered well before Brad Pitt. So one for Mills was Denzel Washington, who turned the role down and regretted it later. Sylvester Stallone was also offered the part, turned that down.
Ew.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Kevin Costner was offered the part, turned it down.
He could have been all right.
Nicolas Cage. So
could
all
have been
these,
okay.
right? I mean, so they were all kind of like I don't know if they were all offered the part, but they were all definitely considered for it. I think Denzel was kind of up there as being considered, the most likely choice for Mills, but I guess he thought it was too dark, turned it down, and then later on said he regretted his decision. So
yeah, and it's interesting that they went with Brad Pitt because he just came off of, I believe, Legends of the Fall.
Yes,
heading into this movie,
right?
So that's a good career move on his part.
Absolutely, and I mean, after this film, like I really started having a lot more respect for Brad Pitt because before that he was just kind of like that, pretty boy or whatever actor. And after Seven, it just started kind of like you kind of start changing your mind about the guy. You see a lot more depth to his character. He said he picked this role and he gravitated towards it because he wanted to get away from his words. He wanted to escape the cheese of Legends of the Fall.
Ah, well, there you go. Yeah, because he also did, I think, 12 Monkeys right after this one.
Right.
And
like right after this
to,
one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it went down because he looks very, very similar. You can just kind of tell he looks really young, and so he's aged well, obviously. But it was kind of funny watching a young Brad Pitt, where you kind of go like, "Oh, that's right, that was his '90s persona."
Right, because I mean, I think one of the early films he did that I really liked him in was True Romance, where he played the stoner Floyd.
Yeah, with the honey bong.
Yes.
I remember that.
I mean, that's like where you can kind of, if you're not paying attention, you could blink and miss it. But he's in that, and he's pretty funny in that one. So,
yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, the role went to Brad Pitt for Mills, and I guess after his initial audition, they liked him, so they picked him up. And then we have the character Somerset, who went to Morgan Freeman, like I said. So some of the early considerations for that role were Al Pacino, Robert Duvall, Gene Hackman, who he said there were too many night shoots, so he turned it down. That apparently didn't appeal to him.
Yeah, old grumpy.
Yeah, exactly. Harrison Ford.
Oh, he would have been cool.
Yeah, that would have been cool. And William Hurt. And William Hurt was who the writer had in mind for this role, but the role, again, went to Morgan Freeman, and after he auditioned, they thought he was right for the part, so...
I couldn't, with all those people you just mentioned, I can't really imagine a different combination because you have the old veteran cop who's on the brink of retirement, and then you've got the young 5-year rookie who's a bit of a hothead, and I think that they made the right decisions because I can't see, two people like just imagine a Sylvester Stallone and an Al Pacino trying to have that same, I just don't see it working. So they did a great job.
Yeah, it would have been more like a straight action movie, which this movie definitely is not. I mean, this movie is way more of a like in your head kind of movie.
Yeah.
So I think
good part on them.
Right. So for the part of Tracy, who was played by Gwyneth Paltrow, I only found one early consideration. It was Christina Applegate, who I think was still doing Married with Children at the time. If I'm not mistaken.
I mean that's a role that could have gone many directions.
Sure,
Gwyneth did fine, but not a lot of screen time. That's interesting.
Yeah, and then finally, John Doe, who ends up being the serial killer. A couple considerations for that were Val Kilmer. So back to him. Here's an interesting one. Michael Stipe was talked about as being the role of John Doe.
Yeah,
you know Michael Stipe is, right?
Oh yeah. That's
REM.
He looks very similar.
He does, and I thought that would have been an interesting turn, but they went with Kevin Spacey 2 days before filming began, and I think Brad Pitt really lobbied to have him in this movie, and Kevin Spacey's role in this movie is interesting because, again, he is the antagonist, and he doesn't show up until about 90 minutes into the film.
And he was uncredited in almost all the promotions and everything, so you really didn't know that he was the person that was in it.
Sure, and if
I remember correctly,
a nice surprise. So, so as far as the director goes, David Fincher did end up directing this film, and it can be kind of considered his first proper film. Do you know the first movie he made?
Oh, I should know it.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, he did a bunch of videos, but the first real movie he did was Alien 3.
Okay.
Which
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So apparently he had a really tough time making this film. He was fired 3 times from the studio when he made Alien 3. And after the film was done, he hadn't read a script in like a year and a half. He was just kind of like, he was almost done directing.
He's just like, I'm over this shit.
Yeah. But I mean, before him, David Cronenberg was offered the role of directing. And then I found this interesting. Guillermo del Toro was offered the role of directing. I don't even know what he was doing at that time, but he was offered.
Wow.
Yeah. And Guillermo
would have done good.
He would have, but he did say that he considers himself a romantic, and he felt this film was too dark and not true to his sensibilities. So hence he turned it down.
Yeah. Huh.
So anyway, Fincher got a script and kind of looked it over, and the script, and I'll just go ahead and say it because it's the spoiler. The script he got was a different ending to it. Okay. So, I mean, kind of the ending that everybody talks about, like the big reveal is Gwyneth Paltrow's head in a box at the very end of the film. And when I go through the plot, I'll kind of explain where that comes in. But when Fincher got the script, they were going to send him a revised version because the studio did not want that ending at all. And on accident, they sent him the original screenplay, which had that head in the box ending, which Soderbergh read. He really wasn't into it that much. Then they called him back and says, well, keep reading. The film really develops from there. Kept reading, and he loved it. He said, quote, it was a meditation on evil, and it wasn't so much about, why this person was a serial killer and why he did it, but it was more about the how. It's more about the methods. So that's kind of how he felt. But then he got a call from the president of production at New Line and told him that, hold on a minute, we sent you the wrong script. We want to go with this revised version because we don't like it. We don't want to have the head in the box scene. And so
you mentioned Soderbergh. Where did he come in?
Did I say Soderbergh? If I did, it was on accident. Yeah. David Fincher. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's all good.
Yeah. Soderbergh had nothing to do with this film. So, okay. So Fincher, he wanted to retain that scene, and then actors Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, they kind of joined up with Fincher and says, no, we will not make this movie unless that scene is in there. And that's pretty much, how it came out to be. And by holding, fast against the studio system, they were able to, retain that end scene. The studio wanted other things. They wanted a dog's head in the box, if anything in the box. They were going for more of like an ending where it was the thrilling chase scene where they're chasing Kevin Spacey, or where Gwyneth Paltrow was about to be killed and they were going after her. But they, Fincher, Pitt, Freeman, they didn't want that ending. They thought the ending was fine in the original script that Walker had written, and that's pretty much what stayed with it. So
yeah,
what do you think about that?
So speaking of the ending, there's about 4 or 5 different commentary versions on the disc, and I went through one of them, and they were talking about that ending part again, because I kind of went there and said, I want to hear how this one goes.
Right.
And yeah, a lot of those things that you mentioned, they definitely discussed where they wanted that to be the dog. So they did make some compromises though for the studio. That was, there's Morgan's got a voiceover at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
Where he kind of talks about whatever, and he didn't want to do it. Nobody wanted to do it, but that was his compromise. And then they also had Mills or Brad Pitt in the car where they kind of showed him defeated, and he said, oh, we'll take care of him or whatever. That was another compromise they had to do because they needed to round off that character and have some resolution.
Yeah.
To kind of dampen the negativity at the end. I mean, there's even like a slight Lethal Weapon moment in it where another version had Morgan Freeman shoot John Doe as opposed to Brad Pitt, and then finish it with "I'm retiring" as his words.
Yeah, one out or something like that.
Yeah, but they just didn't really see Brad Pitt's character just sitting there witnessing that. And what they did mention, and I thought this was just a bigger part of just filmmaking in general, is that really think about it. Films always have to have happy endings. You don't go to the movies to get depressed. And this is one of those movies where you go there and you're going to leave going, there was not a happy ending on that. It was not a good time.
No winners.
No winners. But audiences were getting more sophisticated in the 90s. And they did mention, this is one last point I'll make, is that when Silence of the Lambs as a serial killer movie in, I believe, 91 won an Oscar and did a great job, that they saw that as their opening to finally get this one made. And it took them 3 or 4 years before they could get this movie made. But audiences were starting to change around the mid-90s where something like this could happen and be accepted.
Yeah.
But again, really think about it. Like, how many movies prior to Seven were this dark and not a whole lot going on that had this level of success?
Or that turnaround, really nothing. I mean, the original ending, they were just going to shoot John Doe and then it fades to black.
Yeah.
You know, that was going to be it.
Yeah, the movie starts and it just kind of kicks right off with Morgan Freeman in his apartment and starts. It's just a hard start. There's no warm up or nothing. Yeah,
and there was actually an original opening scene that showed Somerset. He was shopping basically for a retirement home, and he was at this like old kind of broken down farmhouse. And so in that scene, there's like a lot of, unlike the rest of the movie, there's like a lot of lighting. It's really beautifully shot. He sees this like wallpaper of a flower, and he takes his knife out and cuts it out and keeps it with him. And so that was the originally intended shot that was going to be for the movie when it came out. And I guess they just cut it, and it's now an extra on the DVD. So
they weren't feeling it.
But I mean, I'm fine with the way it opens. It's a cold opening. It just shows them kind of getting ready, which I'll get to in a few minutes when I go through the plot.
All right, yeah. So yeah, you just mentioned the shot in the head, black screen, done. I mean, that would have been pretty rad, but anyways, in another life.
Yeah. So, basically by the time they were ready to start making this movie, Fincher had more or less his vision paired with the script. So the script was written by one Andrew Kevin Walker. A couple other things he went on to write were Fincher's next movie, The Game, which is that's a pretty good movie. I like that movie.
I liked it. I like that movie.
Yeah, it's interesting. And he also did some uncredited rewrites on Fight Club. So it's more or less like it's influenced about. He spent some time in New York City. Absolutely hated it. So the movie kind of embodies how he felt about that city. Just with like the busy streets and the coldness and the moral decay and everything. He calls it his love letter to New York City, more or less. And the guy ended up getting a part in the movie. He's the first dead body we see in the film. So,
yeah, wow.
Pretty interesting. But more or less, when Fincher approached this film and he wanted to start making it, he was really paying attention to the camera. And, quote, he wanted to show a city that was dirty, violent, polluted, often depressing. Visually and stylistically, that's how he wanted to portray this world. Everything needed to be as authentic and raw as possible. So he went through his production designer, and they started just basically to create this dismal world that eerily mirrors everybody that's living in it. They wanted the city to reflect the moral decay of all the characters aside from the police and the wife in this film. Everything's kind of falling apart, like you said, and it's like the really dingy, like the worst parts looking of the city. There's nothing really glamorous at all. But it's a very, obviously a very dark, brooding look. There is the rain going on almost the whole time, which I'll talk about in a bit. But there's a certain chemical process that was done with the photography. It's called bleach bypass. Do you know anything about this? I
don't. Enlighten me.
Okay. So basically, just a really quick little rundown, and I'm not too familiar with how film is developed and how photography is developed, but bleach bypass is an optical effect. And what happens is you either skip or you partially skip the bleach function when you process color film. Okay. So by not bleaching the film once you're developing it, you keep the silver in along with the color dyes. So more or less what you're getting is a black and white image over a color image, which is why the film looks the way it does. The saturation's reduced. There's a lot of contrast and a lot of graininess. Okay. And Fincher, so Fincher himself said that he wanted to make a black and white movie in color. And that's kind of how this movie looks. I mean, a lot of times to me, it looks like a 70s, police movie, just like the grittiness of it and the way it's shot. This process was used in other movies, notably 2 Steven Spielberg movies, Saving Private Ryan and Minority Report. They went and used the same.
I was going to say Minority Report has that feel to it.
Yeah.
And it works well with the CGI in there.
It does. And, you know, if you look at Private Ryan, it has like that, especially during the battle sequences, you can totally tell like they're kind of using some kind of different, I mean, they were using vintage cameras, but I mean, just the kind of film stock, it looked different. So,
and when you do that with a digital, you shoot with digital, you can kind of achieve a very similar effect, but it doesn't have that same level of authenticity.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of directors still are very passionate about shooting on film.
Mm-hmm. Right. Instead of going like with just a regular little digital camera, they were always going with that.
That's
okay.
Cool.
So that's more or less the bleach bypass. More or less the film, there's rain in every scene. And this was achieved through the use of what's called rain towers. So these were just more or less the whole time, just always, you know, raining on everything. Really, the only kind of light we see, interestingly enough, is when we see Gwyneth Paltrow. And in the end of the film. So in the end of the film, where the big reveal takes place, there is sunshine out, there is light, and it's very symbolic because that's kind of when we find out the truth about, you know, what happens in the reveal. But other than that, it's pretty much raining like the whole time during this movie. So it creates this obviously very kind of brooding, depressing look to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You don't really know what time of year it is. And it is I do find it is a pretty unique way of kind of setting a tone. Even when the movie's just kind of getting up and going, you don't really notice it and you don't really pay attention to it as you're watching it. You don't step and go, it's always raining. You just kind of accept it.
Yeah.
And you're bought into their story. So I appreciate it a lot.
Right. Morgan Freeman himself on the commentary for the DVD, he made a really good point where he said the rain in the film is like a mask. Whereas it creates this like kind of disorienting feeling the entire time. Like you don't really know what's going on. When they're driving in the cars, you don't really see anything outside of the cars. So it's really interesting how the rain becomes, you know, not only a symbol, but this kind of stylistic technique they're using the whole time.
Yeah, it's a little, makes you feel a little claustrophobic at times because you don't really get a huge sense of space. Most of the sets and the scenes that they're on are very claustrophobic.
Right.
Very dark. There's a lot of natural lighting.
Yeah.
With the use of flashlights and, you know, the light in a refrigerator and various tricks like that. So it was just, you could tell, you could really appreciate the craft that went into it because you had to shoot it knowing what the end result was going to look like and create the right environment to give you that effect.
Yeah, and it had to always go a certain way.
Absolutely.
So let me just kind of take you through the plot, and then I'll kind of jump in with some little factoids. So like you said, it's more or less a cold opening in the film, and we meet Detective William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, who is getting ready for work. He's very kind of an old school detective. He has his shirt and tie. He's got his switchblade and his hat, and he's planning on retiring in 7 days. And then he goes to investigate a murder scene, and that's where he meets his new partner, who's paired up with him to learn the ropes, and that would be David Mills, played by Brad Pitt. So, you know, like there's obviously 7 murders throughout the film, and they're all more or less echoing the 7 deadly sins. And now, can you name any of these 7 deadly sins, Sean?
Let's see. I don't know all 7
there.
But let's say we've got greed,
Okay.
lust, envy. We've got gluttony,
Yes.
right? And we've got vanity or something like that. Vain, pride, yeah.
Yep.
What else we've got? Help me out here.
3 more.
I know. I already forgot the ones that I said.
Sloth.
Sloth, yes. That's
Wrath.
the wrath.
And envy.
Envy.
So we have
Sounds like dwarves.
right. So we got lust, greed, gluttony, envy, sloth, wrath, and pride. So basically, when you have a serial killer, and this is what the writer commented on, is that it makes the story a little more interesting as opposed to having just a one-off murder in a film, because it creates a pattern and a framework to build a story on. So it's like, as a viewer, it's stated in the beginning of the film that there's going to be 7 murders. And as a viewer, you're going to have to go through all 7 of them. So it's like this ticking clock, and you're always kind of knowing that, when's the next murder going to happen, or how's this going to take place. So that's kind of where it fits in. And the thing about this movie that's kind of interesting is that and I'll say it's not really a violent movie. How do you feel about that statement, Sean?
I think that it shows you the aftermath of violence, but you don't witness acts of violence.
Yeah, you don't you hear people talking about it a lot more than anything else.
You're seeing the results of violence or horrific acts, but you don't actually seen it happen. So the rest is they do a great job of leaving it up to your imagination, which is why I think this is hard for a lot of people, because your mind is going to go, as you go through some of these specific murders of what John Doe had to do to kill this person.
Right.
And they spare you those details. There's some stuff that comes up in dialogue, obviously, as they go through it.
Right.
But as you try to imagine that, there's no way you could ever show any of those things.
Well, because they're so shocking, all of them
it's crazy.
They're inventive, but so the first murder is a guy who's more or less been fed until he burst open. Okay.
Yeah.
And so this particular scene called the gluttony scene, and it took 2 days to shoot, and there were 7 crates of cockroaches that were bought and poured over the actor. Okay. Whose makeup, by the way, took 14 hours to apply. Yeah, and then the whole scene, so there's, cockroaches. It's a very dirty scene. And then Somerset thinks that, maybe my new partner here should be put in a different case. And, the captain agrees. So we have a second crime scene come up where an attorney's been murdered in his office, and we see the word greed scrawled on the floor in blood. And then, at the same time, Somerset goes back to the first crime scene and, pulls out the fridge and finds the word gluttony scrawled in grease behind the fridge. So it's like, okay, now we see the connection, and now we know that there's kind of a pattern being created here.
Yeah, and going back to that real quick.
Yes.
The mortician found the bits of plastic that he was fed.
Right.
That was the strips of vinyl ripped up from the floor.
Uh-huh.
And that's where he went and reinvestigated it to find the words behind the fridge. So there's like that little Easter egg or that little plant that John Doe did, almost as if, are you clever enough to identify the patterns or his little markings, so to speak. Right.
And Somerset, his character is very intelligent. I think along with Shawshank and $1 Million Baby, this is probably Morgan Freeman's best role. He is so good in this movie, and his character arc. It's really, the movie's about obviously the serial killer and the murders, but the movie's really about him too, and how he goes through this kind of transformation throughout the course of the movie where, he has 7 days to retire. He wants out. He's very cynical, but then he starts to kind of get sucked into this murder, and it really changes him up until the end of the film.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because now that I'm thinking in retrospect as of just watching it a few days ago, I didn't really view it as he's the main character. It was almost the cop duo, but now that you kind of see how he's typically reacting to Mills, Brad Pitt's character,
right?
You start to kind of see it that his point of view is put out there a lot more,
right?
Whereas Brad Pitt is always the one that is freaking out. Like he said, there's nothing more amusing than watching a man feed into his emotions.
Right.
So he had a line, something along those lines, to where that's kind of what you see as his observations and things. You don't really get it the other way around.
Sure, but it's like, the whole film too, you see, and that's why these two actors are so great and why these characters are so great, because they're these two different warring point of views. So, like you said, Brad Pitt's very raw and emotional, whereas, Freeman's very ordered and methodical in the way he approaches his work. Brad Pitt, upon meeting the serial killer, he says, the guy's crazy. But then Morgan Freeman's saying, oh, well, hold on. There might be something else here. Like maybe this guy's a product of his environment. Kind of plays along that nature versus nurture theory that was exposed to a little bit more in another one of our favorite movies, Trading Places.
Yep.
Remember where the Duke brothers were saying, okay, this guy's maybe a product of his environment. No,
he's
he was
a product
born that way.
of a bad environment.
Right. That's always been like kind of a scientific look. But then also it's like the other point of view this was talked about in one of the commentaries. It's like, do you want to live in a world where you're just apathetic and you don't care, or do you want to live in a world where you can make a difference, yet you might put yourself and your sanity at risk? And so that's kind of what the two characters embody throughout the whole film. And I think it's great the way those worldviews cross and mesh and play off each other the whole time.
Well, John Doe's got a little bit of this Batman thing going on where he's not the hero that the city wants, but he's the hero that the city needs.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how he views himself, as he views himself as doing holy or God's work. And in a really sick and twisted way, you almost kind of buy into his line of thinking.
Yeah.
When you really think about it, in the way they portray it in the movie, I know it's twisted as fuck, but really, you kind of go like, well, yeah, he wasn't, he had this argument at the end where he's talking about these weren't good people.
Yeah.
And
like they might have been good to everybody else, but
his definition of what a good person is, they're not worth saving. The example is greater than the path that they chose to work. So he's essentially trying to turn the spotlight on society by, these murders are pointing at this type of deadly sin and how they're present in society. So it is a very unique way to tell that story. You could have easily done that in very different ways, not necessarily from a serial killer point of view. And I know a lot of movies have addressed that.
Yeah.
But it was definitely a fascinating way to tell that story.
I mean, I think you have to make it. I mean, I think what they were thinking when they wrote it and made it is that you have to be kind of extreme. You have to shock people in order to really make them understand, maybe what's going on.
Yeah, hit them upside the head because they're too numbed.
Yeah, right. So, murder number 3, we had the dead lawyer. They find out that the murders are connected. But before that...
Dead lawyer is number 2, right?
Yeah, dead lawyer is number 2. Hold on, I'm skipping ahead. So before that, this is before like internet research and Wikipedia. Somerset hits up the library and, he starts to research these 7 deadly sins and kind of digs deep and pulls out different, books. And it's a very like beautiful scene where there's some classical music playing and he's looking through some old illustrations and trying to get into the mind of this guy. Following that, he goes to, he's invited by Mills's wife, Tracy, over to their house. And that's where that scene is where they kind of start to bond, Somerset and Mills. It's like a flat apartment where they're close to a train. And the actual set in the film, it's the apartment set is actually the whole thing is a platform, and it's underneath it are just like these Volkswagen engines. So whenever they do the shaking of the house, which isn't long, but they built this whole platform set, that's what it is.
Fincher,
that's
clever.
Yeah, Fincher said that when they'd invite producers and bigwigs onto the set, they'd have them walk onto that set, and then not telling them, they would turn that thing on and it would start to shake. So,
that's cool.
Just having a little fun, I guess, with the producers.
Yeah, going back real quick about that library scene.
Yeah.
Where you mentioned the different tones. That is another great example where they show you the contrast between these two characters, Somerset and Mills, because, Somerset's obviously looking to do his research. Mills opts to get, Cliff Notes delivered to him from some buddy cop. Because he just doesn't have it in him to read all that stuff, and he's like slamming the book around, and so you can see he just does not care about this. He's all action.
Well, I can see why he got the Cliff Notes because, and I have these in my notes. Some of the books he had were books I read in college. I was an English major, and as part of one of my classes, the 3 main texts are the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, and this is probably like the oldest written poem in English language. We have Paradise Lost by Milton, and then The Divine Comedy by Dante. And I mean, these works at the time when I was reading them, they're very kind of hard to get through. older now, way out of college, I can much more appreciate them and read them and try to get into them. But, just the fact that they're kind of referencing this literature made it a little more interesting too. Gave a little more depth to the film.
Yeah, I that is one area I wish they could have dove into a little bit more or added more to the narrative, was a lot of the historical significance behind it, because that ended up leading them down the path, to cross paths with John Doe as their research into who's reading this kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Because they do get into that. So I mean, they start to connect this case together. They talk to the lawyer's widow, and they look behind the painting because she says the painting looks out of place. So they go back to the lawyer's apartment. They take the painting down and they find the words "Help me," and they trace the fingerprints, and it's to one Victor Allen, who's he's been chained to his bed, starving for a year. Remember this scene?
Oh, it was so gross.
It's pretty gross. The SWAT team, the only person that's a real actor is John C. McGinley, who played one of the Bobs in Office Space. So like he's at the head of the SWAT team, but the other guys are all real SWAT team guys in this scene. And there's a part in the scene where they come up to the bed and the guy's like chained to the bed. He's looking horrible.
Oh yeah.
And he gets up and he's still alive. And that reaction from the SWAT team was real. They weren't told that the guy was still alive. So I think that was like a one take
cool
part where he got up and they all kind of reacted and were
they
shocked
needed to capture it.
Surprised. Yeah. So
that's so disgusting.
Yeah. Yeah. That's another thing that makes this movie kind of different.
Sure.
Yeah. So, a little bit after this scene, Tracy invites Somerset to breakfast. She tells him that she's pregnant. She doesn't want to tell Mills, her husband, because she isn't sure she wants to keep it. This is due to the fact that she hates the city so much. She doesn't want to raise a kid there. And it kind of ties into what you're talking about with what John Doe brings up later in the film as to where, there's just so many people in the city that are just really kind of, monsters. And, it's another ethical question. Is he really the monster? And, are these people wrong for feeling the way they do and he's acting on it? So, it raises it's just more of a reflection of the environment. A little, and that's that ties back into the murders. I don't think she's really aware of the specifics, but it's pretty, we sympathize with her in this scene for sure.
Yeah. It's a definitely, that's kind of a turning point in the movie as well.
Yes.
Because he really has that discussion with her and kind of gives her the advice is if you're going to not keep the baby, never tell him. But if you're going to keep it, then you need to love it with all your heart, because I guess his character went through something very similar, and it's the biggest regret he's had. You definitely emphasize a lot with what he's gone through and start to kind of understand his motivations a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. So this is the scene that you were referencing where Somerset calls up this FBI guy he knows, and they have the guy search, computers to check out these books, because apparently like certain books have been tagged, when you check them out. This is back in the days when people actually went to the library.
Yeah, that's under Clinton's watch, right?
Yeah, right. And so they get like, some intel back from this guy, and they trace it to this guy named Jonathan Doe. Okay, literally John Doe. So they pay him a visit. They go to his apartment, and then lo and behold, as they're knocking on his door, John Doe walks up down the hall, opens fire on them. There's a very kind of thrilling chase scene where Mills is chasing after him and injures his arm. And in this scene, Brad Pitt really did injure his arm. Put his hand through some glass, and it's kind of funny because if you really pay attention to the movie, as you know, like a lot of films are filmed out of sequence, and this chase scene was one of the first ones done. And Brad Pitt's arm was like in a sling and in a cast. So there's scenes in the movie where you don't see, I think it's his left hand. There's a scene in the movie where they do show his hand, but it's like purple and bruised. And that's all from like the real injury he got, which I thought was kind of cool. I mean, again, like doing your own stunts and really getting into the part. So he gets injured. Yeah. he gets injured, almost gets killed, but because Doe corners him, but then Doe spares his life. They go back up. They get into a little bit of argument because you can't really go into the guy's apartment because why? Like, Somerset got this information.
There's no motive. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Brad Pitt just kind of, again, back to his anger, kicks in the door, and we go inside the apartment and kind of see what's going on in there.
Well, there's a pause right before that happens.
Yeah.
Where this is the first time you actually see the different points of view in police work, where he gets the money and pays a junkie to make the claim so they could have, probable cause to enter. And that's where you see Somerset like watching Mills have this conversation with this other cop to get it on record. Yeah. And he kind of has like this, not bad.
It's kind of funny. Yeah. It's like real street knowledge.
Yeah. It's that first time you actually kind of see there's a different way to get things done, where one guy's really by the book and the other guy just wants action.
Yeah. And he wants to get it done no matter what. So, I mean, they get like, and that establishes their probable cause. So, looking through the apartment, it's like a lot of interesting things going on. They find these notebooks, these journals that are, basically like written in very small print all the way to the end of the line and the margin. All of these books were actually written for the film. It took them about 2 months to do it, and it cost
them, wrote all of them.
Yeah, like they were all written out. So like it cost them $15,000 in 2 months. And they had a team of people like actually writing these out, which, you only really see a couple of them. You do see them in the opening credits. But yeah, so, I mean, talk about authenticity. It's like you actually, had some guys go ahead and write all this stuff out, and then there you go.
And I respect that level of detail, but at the same time, I mean, I don't really understand why so much effort and money for something that isn't going to show up on film.
Maybe souvenirs for after?
Yeah, possible. I mean, I would love to look more into why directors do that kind of thing, because I know it happens quite a bit.
Right.
Where I think it's just kind of
I think it's just kind of keeping with the character, and like really kind of making it as authentic as possible.
Because if you set that tone for the actors, they'll definitely do a better job. Yeah,
but I mean, if you're talking about someone like Kevin Spacey, they're already doing their job. It's like they're that good.
On a side note, I was listening to an interview with Paul Thomas Anderson about Phantom Thread, and where they filmed that movie in this little cottage in England, and he said that the reason why he did that in such a claustrophobic environment in that old house and not on a set was because there's like these floor creaks and the way that the doorknobs sounded and the doors and just that house, like you couldn't recreate that on a set.
Ambiance.
And yeah, that level of authenticity he felt contributed to the actors' ability to play their characters. So I can see it from that point of view for sure. It's definitely fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I heard another interview with Michael Stuhlbarg, and he was talking about how every time he gets a part, he goes out and buys one of those composition notebooks. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like the
the black speckled covers.
Yeah, and he fills that up with everything he can kind of create about the character. And I just think it's really cool. I mean, because he does a lot of parts where he's in the movie for like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and he's like doing that. I mean, that's that level of like research and depth is like, it's complete commitment. Very, very admirable. So I thought that was interesting too. It's kind of like the other side of it, what the actor brings, and then what the production designer and what the director does for the actor really kind of gels if it's done right.
That's
so anyway,
awesome.
Back to this crazy apartment. They find the journals, and then Mills goes into the bathroom and sees some recently developed photos. Now, we're going to flash back really quick to a scene after they find Victor chained to his bed. They're leaving the apartment. They're accosted by a photographer taking pictures. And in retrospect, it's Kevin Spacey because you hear his voice and you kind of see a side profile of him. But, the pictures in the bathtub are the ones that the photographer at the time took of Mills kind of yelling at him. And Mills is like, we had him and he got away. So.
Yeah, they didn't know.
Yeah, there's no way they could have known.
That's the first time you kind of start putting it together that like, oh, is that, you don't really know at the time. But I just kind of remember that the way that they shot that scene the first time I saw it, they don't show you that person's face. You get his little gumshoe silhouette that he's got with his hat and his trench coat and stuff.
Right.
But his voice is very clear.
Yeah.
And it's not even very Kevin Spacey-esque either. And then when he does the phone call later on and you hear it, you know, after seeing the movie the first time, you put it together.
All right, so now we have our next murder, and this is pretty disgusting, but it's like a sex-related murder. Remember this part, Sean?
Oh, I remember that one. I did not like it.
Yeah, it was. I don't really want to get into it, but there was a pretty lewd photograph. The actor involved, his name's Leland Orser, and to play this little tiny part that he was probably in for a total of a minute, he stayed up for 2 days. And then before the scene, he was in the corner, like hyperventilating. So that when he did the scene, you can really tell he's like stressed out and he's breathing hard, and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it reminds me of that 8mm, I think the Nick Cage movie that was also kind of had a lot of similarities between that and this movie, and it's pretty twisted, just involving, you know, a deadly strap-on sex toy that kills somebody intentionally. I mean, just when you witness this thing and the guy's describing, like, you know, the gun was in my mouth, I had no choice, and it's really tough. And but again, it puts you there just to shows you like how crazy and morbid some people can be, because it's probably a thought that nobody would ever had until you see a movie like this. So yeah, it's definitely twisted.
Yeah. So I mean, there's that one, and
I hope not.
Yeah. Well, right after that, there's another murder where they find a lady, her face is slashed up, and there's some like pills glued to her hand, and then in her other hand's glued a phone. And so that was like a murder based on pride. So they go back to the station, Mills and Somerset, and then as they're walking in and walking up the stairs, that's when John Doe comes in and more or less turns himself in.
Yeah, detective.
Yeah, so,
he's all covered in blood. He's got the tape over his fingerprints because he's been like cutting them off for years, and just kind of shows up. That was an interesting reveal as well.
It was, and you know, he's like they were kind of like cross-examining, or they show him cross-examining. There's a part where he like looks right at the two-way mirror, very calm, and like dipping his tea bag in the hot cup of water and everything. So basically, like, long story short, they kind of make a deal that he wants to show them where his final murders are, but that only Mills and Somerset he wants to take with him to do that. So they drive out, you know, they drive him outside of town. They get in that discussion with them that you kind of alluded to earlier. You know, Mills is calling him crazy. He says he's a movie of the week. He'll be a T-shirt at best. But Somerset doesn't really talk too much. I think he knows something else is going on. And this is where they get out to the field. There's a FedEx guy shows up out of nowhere. He brings a box. And this is where we have our, you know, kind of our penultimate scene in the film, where inside the box is the head of Gwyneth Paltrow, Tracy, Mills's wife. And then he visited, apparently, John Doe before he came to the station house. He visited her and killed her. And then he says that's, you know, his sin. Put her head in the box, send it that way. And I got to tell you, like, the first time I saw this movie, and then I hadn't seen it since after a while, but I always kind of thought that her head, like, I kind of almost remember seeing her head in that box, but they never show it.
Yeah, you don't. No.
So it's kind of,
you just see a little bit of blood and then maybe a little bit of hair.
Yeah. And I mean, like, but I always just kind of like remember it. And there was something on the DVD commentary where Fincher was saying he was at a party and he was getting rebuked by some woman, and she was saying, like, how dare you show that head in the box? And he's like, no, we never showed it. And she kept going on, and she remembered, or she swore up and down that she saw the head. And you know, it's kind of this thing that Fincher talks about where the movie creates what he calls psychic violence, or a psychic attack, where, you know, it just kind of plants things in your brain that may or may not have been there, and it goes back to that whole, you know, kind of implied violence where they're talking about it, and, you know, it wasn't really supposed to be there. So There is one of those, it's like a really quick frame shot, and he does this a lot in Fight Club where you see her face. You almost don't see it. But it's one of those quick, frame. I mean, basically you already kind of know. Somerset runs back to Mills, and once Mills finds out, obviously, heartbroken, he has to make a decision now. Like, do I let this guy go, and let the law deal with him, or do I just shoot him? And this is kind of a moral dilemma because Somerset says, if you shoot him, then he wins. He's committed his act. The last sin would be wrath because Mills would be so upset that he just shoots him out of that kind of anger. So he does shoot him, and instead of going to black, it goes to that end scene we already talked about, and then that's pretty much it. That's kind of where the movie ends.
Yeah, and there's a couple other details I want to mention, because essentially once Kevin Spacey's character is on screen and he's playing this role, he does an excellent job of owning just this psychopath that's a very intelligent and methodical serial killer. You get insight in just a scene like the place that he lived. It's he's got that wireframe bed and a giant illuminated red cross on the wall. It's very dark. He's got his trophies in there, and you see all these aspects of his character that he himself doesn't necessarily embody. Meaning, you wouldn't know by looking at him how he communicates and all those kinds of things that there's that side of him. Where a lot of other movies that glorify serial killers, they often the person visually fits the role. And this is the case where I thought it was a little bit more authentic and just showing you the depth of John Doe's character, so to speak.
Right. Because, I mean, you put together pretty much this puzzle and this kind of picture of him before you even meet him, which, again, isn't until about 3/4 into the movie before it's even over. But
and there's a couple parts of the movie for me that I've always been very curious about is when they actually discover his apartment, they kind of ruin his plans. And so he even mentioned something like that on the phone call, like, I'm going to have to change. I have to
accelerate my plans.
Yeah. And like, what would it have looked like had he not, had they not discovered his apartment? Would the end result be the same? Who knows? And so it's almost like a little bit misunfortunate because them finding his apartment didn't lead him to finding him at all. And they still didn't know who he was, and they still never caught him.
And that's again where it twists the genre. It's like you always catch that guy, and they don't. I mean, they come very close to it, but he could be anywhere.
Yeah, and so I thought that was very fascinating about how they introduced that, and he also kind of knows that he's a martyr for he himself is a bad person, and therefore he puts himself in a circumstance to where he should not live. And he's so confident, and that's how he essentially sets that up because he's envious of Mills. And one of my favorite parts, and this is where, I mean, Brad Pitt does a great job in the movie of playing that role. But it's not necessarily like an acting masterpiece by any means. It's
I think it's a little overacted.
He isn't really... I wouldn't say it's overacted. I just don't think they really wrote him many lines or gave him opportunity to demonstrate, I guess, his acting skill
I mean,
set.
It's almost like in that scene, he regresses to like a child. He's like, no, like, tell me, like he's, it's very, I mean, it's like hard though. I mean, how do you deal with that?
That's what I mean is like, that actual scene, he's acting his ass off because what I really like is he's holding a gun and you can see him struggling and he's trying to get the courage to kill him. He said that earlier they had a conversation in a car or in a cab about Morgan Freeman's only pulled out his gun 3 times. He never shot it. The other guy did, Mills had to do it once. And so they kind of, now he's at this point where he's going to have to shoot his gun and he's really struggling with it. You see him trying to get the courage to do it and he's debating. And at that point, that's where Morgan Freeman's just kind of hanging back. Like I was a little surprised he wasn't like being more aggressive and talking him out of it. He wasn't physically trying to stop him. He really didn't do a whole lot other than just state the case and let the man make his decision. And that's when the screen flashes. It shows Gwyneth Paltrow's face just for a quick second, and then he musters it up and then shoots the guy, shoots John Doe a couple times, and then goes, he just kind of knew it. And so I thought it was very, very brilliant how they crafted all that. And for those out there listening, I mean, really just think about back to the first time you saw this movie. You didn't know anything. There was no spoilers, and you went into it. That's the mindset you have to go back and appreciate it, because now it's like, what's in the box? That's just, everybody's telling you that. That's the funny thing. You quote it. It's funny. But at the time, that wasn't funny. It was a pretty serious moment in the film.
And even like more, it would have been more crazy if it just went to black and you're just sitting there going, what the hell? Like, what just happened? Like we said, that ending, that whole ending part is, Somerset's gone through this transformation, and he's like talking to his boss. He's like, oh, is everything, he's, make sure he's taken care of. And then kind of says, I'll be back to work on Monday. And it's like, the whole movie he's debating whether or not, he wants to be a cop and he wants out and he doesn't like it. And then it's like, well, he's decided, he has to keep going. That line at the end of the movie, to me, it's not really this kind of tagged on thing. It's a Ernest Hemingway quote. He says, the world is a fine place and worth fighting for. I agree with the second part. Hence, he's going to start, he's going to keep doing what he does.
Yeah, I think he kind of realizes that's all he's really got.
That's who he is.
And he'll be back. I'll be around. Yeah, that's who he is.
Yeah.
That's who he is. He's really good at it too.
Yeah.
And so a couple of things, before we close out on this episode, is not only for Fincher was this a huge stepping stone in his career, but a lot of movies also tried to, I think, they took a couple lessons from Seven. And you start seeing movies, I would say, even things like in Saw, and a lot of other darker movies, even some like Tarantino type stuff, can come from Fincher's work. And I think that a lot of people should go back and give this one another watch, after listening to this episode and just noticing the craft work that went into making this movie. While the subject content for some can be a little bit strong, from character development to how the story goes, the pacing of it, and just from you're not your traditional serial killer or detective movie. It's definitely.
Do you think the stuff in the movie is still shocking after 20 years of everything we've seen on the, because when this movie came out,
absolutely,
which just makes it kind of a modern classic, because when this movie came out in 95, the internet was really still in its infancy, so you weren't really seeing everything you could see today. Yet, with all that stuff and all the violence we've been exposed to, this stuff is still pretty crazy and really shocking.
Yeah, I would say yes, and that is simply what's not shocking is the visual aspect of it. They did a good job portraying these crime scenes and showing things, and it's about I can't think of any other movie that visually was more grotesque, so to speak. I think a lot of horror is pretty bad in a lot of movies because it doesn't look real.
It's just going for that look on purpose almost. Whereas here it's very
you can tell, but
matter of fact. It's like, the guy was fed until he basically burst, and that's it. They're not going for that shock value.
But what is, I think, if you compare this to, let's say, Silence of the Lambs, for example, you don't really believe that, at least for me, that the killers and that did those things. They don't really make you that connection. You're just going off the face value or the story. Visually, you don't really get those strong kind of reminders of how crazy these guys are. And on this one, there's a much more intimate relationship between John Doe and his victims. And you're seeing that level of intimacy, and you're seeing that level of craft and attention to detail went into these gruesome acts. That's what I think makes it timeless, is because humans are capable of some twisted shit, and they did a great job of just portraying that. This isn't as bad as it can get. But now that you're seeing it, and you're seeing them investigate it, and you're seeing people's reactions to it, even as simple as walking into a room and covering your mouth because of the stench. before you even see what stinks. You already kind of feel like you're there. They did a great job.
And it's different, and it is that authentic, because in a lot of, serial killer movies, like you'll have a scene where they're investigating, and then it'll cut to the guy, kidnapping someone and killing them, and then it'll cut back to the investigation. In this movie, you don't see any of that. I mean, it's all from the point of view of these two guys. You're not seeing John Doe going out and doing what he does. So I think that makes it like you have to have the strong characters, and this movie does, and that's how you really start to like get in the mind of this killer through their eyes. Yeah,
that's true. That's a good point, and that's something that makes me even want to go watch it again and just kind of realize, like, you actually don't see any of these things happen. As we discussed earlier.
Like Fincher has a quote, and this will be kind of a good ending, but he says it's a beautiful movie with some awful things in it, and that's kind of what he said about this movie.
Couldn't say it better.
Thank you.
All right, well, good pick. Hope you guys enjoyed our discussion on Seven. Next week, we're going to look to lighten things up a little bit after the last few, and we're going to be talking about our favorite comedies of all time.
All time, like back to the 70s at least.
Back to the 70s, yeah. Ryan and I are working on our lists. We're going to come together with our lists, and we need to come out and come up with a collective top 10 in our opinion. So look forward to that one. We're going to put some discussion out there on Twitter and Facebook. Would love to get your guys' feedback on what are some of your favorite comedies. So check us out at the Harsch Review or at Harsch Review on Twitter. Share your movies with us. We want to see if you share them or if there's something that's new that we weren't thinking. And that will be coming out next week. So that's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Another big shout out to the folks who went to our iTunes podcast page and left us some nice reviews. I'm looking at you, Jim Vamp and Jay Nisbet26. Thank you very much for the support. It means a lot, and it helps the show get the right exposure and, help get extra listeners. It makes it fun for both of us.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Well, we hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully we didn't take you guys out too much, and you found some good things in a dark but beautiful movie.
Yes.
That'll do it for this week. My name is Sean.
And I'm Ryan.
Have a good one.